My parents kicked me out for their golden child, left me homeless. Now, they returned broke in debt and begged, but I made a choice that shattered all. Things got worse when my brother, Leo, was born. He was the golden child from the start. My parents were obsessed with him. He was the perfect baby, the kind of kid who looked good in photos and always had adults cooing over him. It was like he became their living, breathing art project. They took him everywhere, gallery openings, art fairs, even coffee shops where they'd sit for hours pretending to be deep thinkers. Me? I was left at home, usually with the TV as my babysitter. I don't even blame Leo, he was just a kid, and honestly, he didn't know any better. But the favoritism was so blatant that even strangers noticed. At one of their art showings, a lady asked my mom why I wasn't in any of the family photos on display. My mom just laughed and said, "She's not very photogenic." That one stuck with me for years. It wasn't just the photos, either. My parents would constantly criticize me, whether it was my weight, my clothes, or even the way I walked. My mom once told me I ruined the family's look because I was too awkward. I started avoiding mirrors because I hated what I saw and how they made me feel about myself. I wasn't pretty. I wasn't graceful. I wasn't what they wanted. Leo, on the other hand, was everything they'd ever dreamed of. What hurt the most was how little they cared about my accomplishments. I wasn't a bad student, actually, I was pretty good. I got mostly A's and even won a couple of writing contests. But my parents never showed up to parent-teacher conferences or school events. When I showed my mom one of my awards, she just glanced at it and said, "That's nice. Put it on the fridge or something." Meanwhile, when Leo drew a stick figure, they'd gush about how he was going to be the next Picasso. By the time I was a teenager, I'd given up on trying to impress them. They didn't care, so why should I? I started spending most of my time in my room, reading or watching movies. I'd try to avoid being around them as much as possible because every interaction just made me feel worse about myself. It wasn't like I had anywhere else to go. My parents didn't have any close friends who had kids, and I wasn't allowed to go out much. They'd say it was because they didn't want me getting in trouble, but I think they just didn't want to deal with the inconvenience. Holidays were the worst. Christmas was basically a non-event in our house. When I was around 10, I begged my parents to get a Christmas tree, and they finally caved and bought one of those cheap fake ones. After that, it became my job to set it up every year. They didn't even bother putting up decorations. They'd just give me some cash and say, "Buy whatever you want for yourself." Birthdays were the same. They'd hand me money and tell me to go pick something out. No cake, no party, not even a happy birthday most of the time. Leo, of course, got the full treatment. My parents would throw these elaborate birthday parties for him, complete with custom decorations and expensive gifts. One year, they even hired a magician. I remember sitting in my room during one of his parties, listening to the laughter and music downstairs, and wondering why I wasn't good enough for that kind of attention. It wasn't just about the presents or the parties. It was the way they treated me like I was an outsider in my own family. They didn't care about my feelings, my needs, or my future. When I turned 16, I thought maybe I could finally connect with them. I asked if I could help out at one of their gallery events, just to feel like I was part of something. My mom laughed and said, "We don't need help, sweetheart, but thanks." That was her nice way of saying no. My dad was more blunt, "You were not really the vibe we're going for." That hurt more than I can even explain. I wasn't the vibe? What did that even mean? I wasn't asking to be a centerpiece, I just wanted to feel included for once. But they didn't want me there. I wasn't pretty enough, thin enough, or cool enough to fit into their artsy world. By the time I graduated high school, I was done trying. I'd already started working part-time at a grocery store to save up money because I knew what was coming. My parents made it clear that I wasn't welcome in their house after graduation. They didn't even try to sugarcoat it. My dad handed me a printed eviction notice, yes, an actual legal document, and told me I had 30 days to figure it out. Meanwhile, Leo, who was only a year younger than me, got to stay. He wasn't even contributing anything to the household, but that didn't matter. He was their perfect son, their golden boy, and he could do no wrong. I couldn't even be mad at him. He'd grown up with their constant praise and attention, so he didn't really know any other way. But it still felt like a slap in the face. The day I moved out was one of the worst days of my life. I had nowhere to go. None of my friends had space for me, and I didn't have enough money for a deposit on an apartment. I ended up at a women's shelter, sharing a room with 3 other people. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than sleeping on the street. For the first time in my life, I was completely on my own, no family, no safety net, no one to lean on. It was terrifying, but at the same time, it was almost freeing. My parents had thrown me out like I was trash, but at least now I didn't have to live under their shadow anymore. Little did I know, that was just the beginning of the fight for my own life. Moving into the shelter was surreal. I hadn't expected much when I got there, and honestly, that was probably a good thing. The building was old, with peeling paint and creaky floors, but the people were kind in a way I wasn't used to. The staff didn't ask for details unless I wanted to share, and the other residents didn't pry. Most of us were just trying to keep our heads above water. I shared a room with 3 other women. It was cramped, and privacy was almost non-existent, but at least I had a bed. I wasn't sleeping in the cold or on a park bench. The shelter provided meals, too, simple stuff like canned soup or pasta, but it was warm, and it filled my stomach. It wasn't much, but it felt like more care than I'd gotten from my parents in years. The shelter had rules, though. We had to be out during the day, either looking for work or attending appointments, which was tough because I didn't even know where to start. I had no savings left after my parents had kicked me out, no work lined up, and no idea how to navigate adult life. The shelter had a resource center with donated clothes and job postings pinned to a corkboard. I spent hours there every day, sending out applications for anything I thought I could handle. The other women at the shelter were the closest thing I had to a support system. Some were older women who had escaped bad marriages or lost their homes. Others were younger, like me, trying to figure out how to survive on their own. I didn't talk much at first. I was too embarrassed, too ashamed of how I'd ended up there. But one of the older women, Maria, took me under her wing. She told me her story, a brutal tale of being left with nothing after her ex-husband drained their bank accounts, and it made me realize I wasn't alone in feeling betrayed by people who should have cared for me. It was Maria who encouraged me to reach out to my family. Not your parents, she said firmly, but anyone else who might help. Sometimes people surprise you. At first, I resisted. My parents had made it clear that I wasn't welcome in their lives, and I didn't want to hear more rejection. But one night, when the shelter was quiet and I couldn't sleep, I dug out the old phone I'd barely been using. I remembered hearing my mom mention Aunt Rebecca once when I was younger. She'd called her practical in a tone that made it sound like an insult. That's when I realized Rebecca might be exactly the kind of person I needed. I didn't have her number, but a quick search online turned up her work information. She was a nurse at a hospital a couple of states away. I hesitated before dialing, staring at the screen and wondering if she'd even remember me. When she answered, her voice was brisk and professional. "This is Rebecca." I stammered out my name and explained who I was. For a moment, there was silence, and I braced myself for her to hang up. Instead, she said, "Oh my God, are you okay?" That simple question nearly broke me. I hadn't heard genuine concern from an adult in years. I told her everything, how my parents had kicked me out, how I'd ended up in the shelter, and how I had no idea what to do next. She didn't interrupt or ask too many questions. When I was finished, she said, "You don't have to go through this alone. I'm coming to get you." True to her word, Rebecca showed up at the shelter 3 days later. She didn't come empty-handed, either. She brought a suitcase full of clothes in my size, toiletries, and even a box of snacks. She hugged me like she hadn't seen me in years, which, I guess, was true. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed being hugged. The car ride to her house was a blur. I was exhausted but relieved. Rebecca lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy and warm, with mismatched furniture and framed photos of her and her dog, a chubby golden retriever named Max. She told me to settle into the guest room, which had fresh sheets on the bed and a stack of books on the nightstand. For the first time in months, I slept without worrying about what tomorrow would bring. Rebecca didn't waste time getting me back on my feet. She was the kind of person who believed in action, not just words. She helped me set up a budget, opened a joint account with me so she could teach me about saving, and even took me shopping for professional clothes so I could go to job interviews. "Don't think of this as charity," she said. "Think of it as an investment. You'll pay it forward someday." Through her connections, I landed a part-time job at a local bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and I loved being surrounded by books all day. Rebecca also encouraged me to enroll in community college. She said education was the key to independence, and she was right. I started taking night classes, balancing work and school, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something meaningful. Living with Rebecca was a revelation. She didn't treat me like a burden or an afterthought. She asked about my day, listened to my stories, and actually cared about my answers. She even helped me rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten. When she saw some old sketches I'd made, she encouraged me to pick up drawing again. "Art doesn't have to be about impressing anyone," she said. "It's about finding joy in creating." Slowly, I started to heal. The bitterness I felt toward my parents didn't go away, but it started to feel less all-consuming. Rebecca reminded me that family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who show up for you when you need them most. She showed me what it meant to have someone in your corner, and I'll never stop being grateful for that. Life wasn't perfect, of course. Money was still tight, and there were nights when I'd sit in my room and cry because the weight of everything felt too heavy. But I wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. With Rebecca's support, I started to see a future for myself, one where I wasn't defined by my parents' neglect or their obsession with their golden child. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. Life with Aunt Rebecca was different in every possible way from what I was used to. For starters, she had routines. There were specific days for grocery shopping, doing laundry, and even taking Max, her golden retriever, to the park. At first, it felt strange. My parents had always lived in chaos, with no schedule other than their endless artistic inspiration sessions. But soon, the rhythm of Rebecca's life started to make me feel safe. I could count on things happening when she said they would, and that kind of stability was something I'd never had before. One of the biggest challenges was adjusting to being treated like an equal. Rebecca didn't see me as a burden or someone to be pitied. She respected my opinions and gave me responsibilities around the house. At first, I thought it was just her way of being polite, but then I realized she genuinely trusted me. She taught me how to cook, helped me set up my own bank account, and even let me pick out the color for repainting the guest room, which she said was now my room. It was small, but it felt like mine in a way no other space ever had. The bookstore job was another step toward independence. It was a quiet place, tucked away in a corner of town, and it smelled like old paper and wood polish. My boss, Linda, was a kind but no-nonsense woman who loved recommending books to anyone who walked in. She took a liking to me right away and often called me her little protégé, even though I wasn't doing anything special. Just shelving books, working the register, and helping customers find titles. Working there made me realize how much I loved books, not just as a way to escape but as a way to connect with the world. Customers would come in with all kinds of stories, looking for books to help them through breakups, grief, or even just boredom. I started keeping a notebook of the titles people recommended, and over time, I built a small library for myself. I didn't have much money, so most of my books came from the clearance shelf or were gifts from Linda, who always seemed to find excuses to accidentally overstock something I'd mentioned wanting to read. Community college was harder. I hadn't been in a classroom for a while, and I wasn't sure I could keep up. My first class, Intro to Psychology, was a disaster. I showed up late, forgot to bring a notebook, and couldn't answer a single question when the professor called on me. I left that day feeling like a failure, convinced I wasn't cut out for higher education. But when I got home, Rebecca sat me down at the kitchen table and helped me come up with a plan. "You're not failing," she said. "You're learning, and that's the whole point." Rebecca's words stuck with me. Slowly but surely, I found my footing. I figured out how to organize my time, take notes, and even participate in class discussions. By the end of the semester, I wasn't just passing, I was thriving. I loved learning, and I realized I wanted to keep going. I wasn't sure what I wanted to major in yet, but the idea of having a future, one I could shape for myself, was exhilarating. One of the most surprising things about that time was how much support I received from people outside my immediate circle. Linda would let me take extra shifts when I needed more money, and some of the women from the shelter even stayed in touch, cheering me on from afar. It was like I'd stumbled into this network of kindness and encouragement that I'd never known existed. Not everything was smooth sailing, though. There were moments when the weight of everything, my past, my family, my uncertain future, would hit me all at once. I'd sit in my room, staring at the walls, and wonder if I was ever going to be enough. Was I really capable of building a life for myself? Did I deserve it? Those thoughts were hard to shake, and sometimes they'd keep me up at night. Rebecca always seemed to know when I was struggling, even if I didn't say anything. She had this uncanny ability to check in at just the right time, usually with a cup of tea or a plate of cookies. "You don't have to do this all at once," she'd remind me. "One step at a time. That's how you climb a mountain." It became a kind of mantra for me, something I'd repeat to myself on the tough days. As I settled into this new chapter of my life, I started thinking about my parents less and less. They hadn't reached out since kicking me out, and honestly, I didn't expect them to. I wasn't part of their world, and I didn't want to be. But Leo was a different story. Every now and then, I'd wonder what he was up to. Did he ever think about me? Did he even notice I was gone? I thought about reaching out to him, but something always stopped me. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that I wouldn't like the answers I got. One day, while organizing some of Rebecca's old photo albums, I found a picture of her and my mom from when they were kids. They looked so different from the people I knew, happy, carefree, and inseparable. It made me wonder what had gone wrong between them. Rebecca didn't talk about my mom much, but I could tell there was a lot of hurt there. She wasn't always like this, Rebecca said when I asked. Your mom had a lot of dreams, and when they didn't pan out, she took it out on everyone else. That explanation didn't make me forgive my mom, but it did make me see her in a different light. She wasn't some untouchable figure, she was just a flawed, fragile person who didn't know how to handle her failures. It didn't excuse what she'd done to me, but it helped me start letting go of the anger I'd been carrying for so long. By the time I'd been living with Rebecca for a year, I hardly recognized myself. I had a job I loved, classes I was excited about, and a sense of purpose I'd never felt before. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building a life. And for the first time, I started to believe that I was worth the effort. For a while, life with Aunt Rebecca felt like a safe bubble. I focused on work, school, and figuring out who I was without the shadow of my parents looming over me. But that bubble didn't last forever. One day, out of the blue, I got a text from my younger brother, Leo. I hadn't heard from him since I left home, and seeing his name on my phone screen made my stomach twist. Hey, the message read. Been a while. Can we talk? I didn't know how to respond. Leo had always been my parents' golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I didn't resent him for it, not really. He was just a kid caught up in their toxic dynamic, like I was. But when they kicked me out and let him stay, it felt like a confirmation of everything I'd always feared, that I didn't belong, that I wasn't good enough. After staring at the message for far too long, I finally replied, "What do you want to talk about?" His answer came quickly, "Mom and Dad stuff. Things have been weird here." Curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to a phone call, but my hands shook as I dialed. It was strange hearing his voice after all this time. He sounded older, more serious. He didn't waste any time getting to the point. "Mom and Dad are a mess," he said. "The art stuff isn't working out, and they're fighting all the time. I think they might lose the house." I wasn't surprised. My parents had always been terrible with money, pouring everything they had into their art while ignoring practicalities like bills and savings. But what caught me off guard was the way Leo talked about it. There was no trace of the golden child I remembered, the kid who thought our parents hung the moon. He sounded tired, frustrated, even angry. "They've been taking it out on me," he continued. "I think they're expecting me to fix everything." I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him it wasn't his responsibility. But another part of me felt like this was his reckoning. He'd always been their favorite, the one they put on a pedestal. Now he was getting a taste of what it felt like to be weighed down by their expectations. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. "Because you're the only one who gets it," he said. "I don't have anyone else to talk to." That hit me harder than I expected. For all their favoritism, my parents had failed Leo, too. They'd never taught him how to be independent or how to navigate the real world. They'd only ever cared about how he made them look. And now that their lives were falling apart, they were dragging him down with them. Over the next few weeks, Leo and I started talking more. He told me about the fights, the debt, and how our parents were trying to pressure him into helping them sell their art online. They'd even suggested he quit school to focus on the family business. It sounded eerily familiar, like a twisted echo of the life I'd left behind. But as much as I felt for Leo, I couldn't let myself get sucked back into their drama. I had worked too hard to build a life for myself, and I wasn't about to let them drag me down again. When he asked if I could help, I told him the truth: I can't. They made their choices, and they have to deal with the consequences. Leo didn't take it well. He accused me of abandoning him, of being selfish. It hurt, but I stood my ground. "You're not a kid anymore," I told him. "You have to decide what kind of life you want. Don't let them make that choice for you." Our conversations became less frequent after that. I missed him, but I knew I'd done the right thing. My parents had already taken so much from me, I couldn't let them take more. Then, one day, I got a call from Aunt Rebecca while I was at work. Her voice was tense. "Your parents showed up at my house," she said. My heart sank. "What?" "They said they were looking for you. They wanted to reconnect." Her tone made it clear she didn't buy their story. I felt a mix of anger and panic. I hadn't told my parents where I was living, and I couldn't believe they'd stooped to dragging Rebecca into their mess. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them to leave and not come back," she said firmly. "But I think you should be prepared. They're desperate." Desperate. That word stuck with me. It explained everything: their sudden interest in me, their attempts to use Leo, even their willingness to show up at Rebecca's door uninvited. Their world was crumbling, and they were grasping at straws. I decided to take action before they could make things worse. I got new locks for the house and set up security cameras, something Rebecca insisted on helping with. "They're not going to bully their way into your life again," she said. Sure enough, a few days later, my parents tried to contact me. First, it was a string of emails filled with flowery language about family ties and starting fresh. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. They accused me of being ungrateful, of abandoning them in their time of need. It was textbook manipulation, and I refused to fall for it. Eventually, they showed up at my house. I didn't let them in. I stood on the porch, blocking the door, and told them to leave. My mom tried to guilt trip me, going on about how hard things had been for them. My dad just stood there, scowling, like he couldn't believe I was standing up to them. "You owe us," my mom said at one point. "We raised you. We gave you everything." "Everything?" I snapped. "You kicked me out and left me in a shelter. You gave Leo everything, not me." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "I don't owe you anything. Now get off my property before I call the police." They left, but not before my mom gave me one last parting shot. "You'll regret this. Family is all you have." But that wasn't true. I had Rebecca. I had the friends I'd made at work and school. I had myself. Family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up for you. And my parents had never shown up for me. As I watched them drive away, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Part of me wished things could have been different, that they could have been the parents I needed. But another part of me knew that letting them go was the only way to move forward. I had built a life without them, and I wasn't about to let them tear it down. After the confrontation with my parents on the porch, I thought I was done with them. I'd made my boundaries clear, and for a while, it seemed like they were going to respect that. Weeks went by without any contact from them. I threw myself into work and school, grateful to get back to my routines without the weight of their drama hanging over me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. My parents were nothing if not persistent when they wanted something. The first sign came in the form of a letter. It wasn't handwritten, just a plain, typed sheet of paper folded neatly in an envelope. My name and address were printed on the front, with no return address. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page filled with formal language, telling me they intended to reclaim their connection with me and repair the family bond. It read like something they'd copied off the internet, as if they were trying to appeal to some higher sense of morality. At the bottom, both of them had signed their names in a scroll that felt as fake as the sentiment. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. They didn't want to reconnect, they wanted something from me. That much was obvious. Aunt Rebecca wasn't surprised when I told her about the letter. "They're running out of options," she said. "Don't let them guilt you into anything. You've worked too hard to get where you are." She was right, of course, but that didn't stop the anxiety from creeping in. I started double-checking the locks on my doors, making sure the cameras were working. Every time I left the house, I half expected to find them waiting for me when I came back. I hated that they had this power over me, that even after everything, they could still make me feel like a scared, helpless kid. The second sign came in the form of Leo. He called me out of the blue, something he hadn't done since our last tense conversation. I debated whether to answer but finally picked up. His voice was quieter than usual, almost hesitant. "Hey," he said. "Mom and Dad want me to talk to you." Of course they did. I leaned back against the wall, already bracing myself for whatever guilt trip they'd cooked up this time. "What do they want, Leo?" "They're struggling," he said. "They think you can help. They're saying you should sell your house and use the money to help them pay off their debts." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. "Let me get this straight. They want me to sell the house I worked my ass off to buy so I can bail them out after they kicked me out and left me in a shelter? Seriously?" Leo didn't argue. I could tell he didn't believe it either, but he was caught in their web, just like always. "I don't think it's fair," he said, "but they're desperate. They're saying it's the least you can do." "The least I can do?" My voice rose before I could stop it. "Leo, they don't care about me. They never have. This isn't about family, it's about them using me like they've used you your whole life." There was a long pause, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "You're right," he said finally. "I don't know why I thought this would work. I'm sorry." For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope for Leo. Maybe he was starting to see them for who they really were. "You don't have to keep letting them control you," I said. "You're an adult now. You can say no." "I don't know if I'm ready for that," he admitted, "but I'll think about it." It wasn't much, but it was a start. The final straw came a few weeks later. I came home from work one evening to find a moving van parked in front of my house. My stomach dropped as I saw my parents standing on the porch, their arms crossed like they were waiting for me. I didn't even bother getting out of the car. Instead, I grabbed my phone and called the police. When the officers arrived, my parents tried to play the victim. My mom started crying, saying I'd invited them to move in and then changed my mind. My dad stood there, arms folded, claiming they had a verbal agreement with me. I stayed calm, explaining that they were trespassing and that I had no intention of letting them stay. Thankfully, the cameras I'd installed caught everything. Their arrival, their attempts to break in, even their argument on the porch about whether I'd actually let them in. The footage shut down their lies in an instant. The police gave them a choice: leave voluntarily or be removed. My parents chose the former, but not without plenty of theatrics. My mom sobbed dramatically as she packed her things back into the van, while my dad muttered under his breath about ungrateful children. I watched from the window, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. This was the last time they'd ever try to worm their way back into my life. After they left, I changed all the locks again, even though they hadn't gotten inside. Rebecca came over that weekend to help me install new cameras and reinforce the windows. "You've done everything right," she said. They're grasping at straws now. But even with her reassurance, I couldn't shake the lingering fear. What if they tried something else? What if they never gave up? The answer came a few months later when I got a call from Leo. "They're gone," he said, his voice heavy. "They moved to another state to live in one of Mom's inherited properties. I think they've finally given up on you." Hearing that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in years, I felt free. I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore, waiting for the next crisis to hit. My parents were out of my life, and I intended to keep it that way. These days, I focus on the things that matter: my job, my classes, and the future I'm building for myself. Rebecca is still my rock, always there to offer advice or just listen when I need to vent. Leo and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship, though it's complicated. He's still tied to our parents in ways I'm not, but I hope he'll find his own way out someday. As for my parents, I don't think about them much anymore. They made their choices, and I've made mine. They may have tried to define me as the problem child, the one who didn't fit their mold, but I've proven that I'm so much more than that. I've built a life for myself, a real life, full of people who love and support me. And that's something they can never take away.